Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Foreign Policy. And today, being the safe week, we are going to understand the foreign policy of African Union. We've been dealing with foreign policy all this while, so the safe week or the safe topic. And today is the 19th of July 2024. The name is H. Kwame Afaglo. In this study, we're going to appreciate what Organization of African Union is, what the strengths are, what the weaknesses are, and why it changed to African Union. Then we look at the foreign policy dimensions of all this with respect to colonization, liberalization, neoclassical counter-revolution, and some of this. So whilst we're going through, viewers would pick up the foreign policy of Africa or African nations carefully. All right. OAU was established in May 1963 by the brainchild Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, who was then the Prime Minister of Ghana. All right. The first meeting or the inaugural meeting of OAU was in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. And a lot of the African leaders were present. There were 32 independent African states present at the time. Africa is made up of 54 nations or 54 countries, and in 1963, 32 of them formed the Organization of African Union. Interestingly, most people or some people think that Africa is a continent and a one country, but it is not. It's made up of 54 countries. They're not 54 states, 54 countries, 54 independent and sovereign countries. Let me put this way. Independent and sovereign nations, they are not states. In the sense that a state is where you have a homogeneous group of people, maybe same language, with a demarcation and a name. But this is an aggregate of various ethnic group of people in a geographical area with a name. So then it's more of a nation. Okay, so that's what we're dealing with in Africa. And they are independent nations, 54 of them. At the time in 1963, when a lot of African countries had gotten independence, 32 of them decided to agree with Dr. Nkrumah and few others to form an Organization of African Unity. What are the aims? One is to kick out colonialism. Two, to liberate other African countries that are under colonialism. That's about the same thing. Three, to promote a union within the African nations. Four, to promote economic enhancement, economic unity among the African states. So those were the few aims that Organization of African Unity came up with at the time in 63. What are some of the strengths of Organization of African Unity, OAU? One, they were very successful in kicking out colonialism from a country like Zimbabwe. They pushed and pushed, helped the Zimbabweans push and push. They helped them military-wise, military training, and then technological training, academic training for the nationals who were resistant forces. He helped them in various ways, both military and then non-military, such that they went home and then fought for their independence. So Zimbabwe, Guinea-Bissau, Mozambique, Angola, and then South Africa itself. Okay, but let's leave South Africa for now because that's not an independence fight. That was not against colonialism. Okay, so that is one advantage. The other advantage is that they helped kick out apartheid out of South Africa. South Africa was under apartheid where the aliens or the foreigners actually were in control, the governance control over the country, over the indigenes. And so the indigenes needed to be liberated. And apartheid was more of a discriminatory policy. They practiced it. And so its abrogation was very important. What did the OAU do? One, they made sure that the world understood what apartheid was in South Africa, and it was very bad, very discriminatory. Two, they placed an embargo on South Africa all their airlines never to land on any of the OAU member nations or fly off. None. Okay. They also lobbied WHO, World Health Organization, to kick out South Africa. That's also another advantage. And so apartheid was weak, and then there was so much lobbying from the OAU leaders, and apartheid became weak, and they just gave up. And ANC took up the elections. ANC is a South African political party that took up, that went into the polls and then took the governance and dismantled apartheid. They had a military wing. I've forgotten how it's pronounced. They had a military wing. So that's it. All right. So ANC, Organization of African Union, helped them to liberate themselves from apartheid. All right. So those were some of the advantages that came up with it. Let's go to the weakness. There are other advantages anyway. Another advantage is that OAU helped in the formation of African Development Bank. OAU helped in the formation, establishment of African Development Bank, which is also another big plus. Right. OAU has several other advantages because they had regional blocks out of it. Say, West Africa Regional Bloc, they call ECOWAS, Economic Community of West African States. Then we have the Economic Community of Central African States, ECCS. Then we have Southern African Development Community. We have East African Community, I think so. East African Community, EAC, ECA. Then we have Arab Maghreb Union, AMU. So we have COMESA and others are all part of it. So we have these various branches who are working in various ways to pool the resources on the regional side. The regional side, say West Africa would have to come up with some policies that are aligned with the Organization of African Unity. And that they will come up with a common market, they will come up with a common currency and blah, blah, blah. So it's all gearing towards one goal, that's the Organization of African Unity. The issue is that because of the heterogeneous nature of Africa in terms of ethnicity, the heteroethnicity nature of Africa, you would have to be very mindful how you would enter Africa and double with its foreign policy. Okay, in that sense, Organization of African Union, OAU, at the time, most of the founding fathers of the nations were realists. They were realists. They understood that, look, their nations have been captured or colonized by foreigners. So they needed to take it back. And they understood that there was what? Aggression. They understood that, look, anytime you are dealing with another entity, say another nation, you have to take your self-interest first, and that's realism. So the founding fathers actually thought of their self-interest of their nation first, and not of the usurper. France, UK, United Kingdom, Portugal, and the Arabs. That's not what they were not thinking in their interest, because they were always, those usurpers were always exporting out of Africa, taking everything, the resources out of Africa. So the founding fathers of African Union, Organization of African Union, decided to take back African countries for their people. They took back African countries for their people because it belonged to them. And what belongs to them must belong to them. So it was realism and constructivism. They knew who they were Africans, they knew they were Zimbabweans, they knew they were South Africans, they knew they were Namibians, they knew they were Ugandans, they knew they were Burundians, they knew they were Ethiopians, they knew they were Kenyans, they knew they were Ghanaians, they knew they were Nigerians, they knew they were Togolese, they knew they were Liberians, they knew all this. So that is them. And then you, the usurper, you are another person. So they look at you and say, look, you are not one of us. So if you are not one of us, then you are an enemy. You are either with us or you are against us. And that's constructivism. And that's, they needed to look at the norms aspect of it carefully. Okay, so let's take a break and then we'll continue. All right, we're back for the second segment. The topic is African Union or foreign policy of African Union. Like I did say, Africa is made up of 54 nations and not states, nations, independent sovereign nations. 54 independent sovereign nations. They are not as if it's one continent and one country. No. 54 independent sovereign nations. Okay, so before we went for the break, we were talking about the strengths of African Union, and we mentioned a couple of them, that the OAU did form the African Development Bank, which is functional as of today, 2024. Okay, then let's look at some of the weaknesses. African Union OAU didn't have a standing army, and it was one of their weaknesses. So anytime there was trouble in any African country or among African countries, then it becomes problematic. You have to either call on UN to send soldiers to come and assist, or you have to call on US to gain funds or something. And that itself was a weakness for Organization of African Union. If it were not a weakness, you would have noticed it in the Biafra War, the Nigerian Civil War, 1967 all the way to 1970. That was very real. That was an unpleasant war. War is always unpleasant, but that was really bad. Really, really bad. 1967 to 1970, Nigeria was really bad because the Igbos wanted to secede out of Nigeria to be an independent country of their own, or a nation of their own out of Nigeria. And Nigerians didn't agree. Some Nigerians didn't agree, so they had to fight them. The Federal Republic didn't agree, so they had to fight them to keep them as a state. That is one aspect. If African Organization of African Union, OAU, had a standing army at the time, that would have been sorted out early. And when that is sorted out, it brings peace. Mind you, look at the Liberian Civil War and how ECOWAS went in there and sorted it out. That tells you that OAU has been good. That ECOWAS it formed, it sorted out the Liberian crisis, the Liberian Civil War. Okay. Another one that OAU couldn't solve was the Angola one, the Angola War. The Angola War was from 75 thereabout to 2002 between Savimbi, who was Western oriented, and then Eduardo dos Santos, who was Eastern oriented. Okay, so they fought for a long time. They killed a lot of people and caused a lot of destruction for their country. But then Savimbi had to give up simply because, not because he was just killed, but you know, the West who was supporting him, the USA that was supporting him, look at foreign policy a bit different. There's nothing like permanent friendship, but there's a permanent interest. Let me put it this way. USA foreign policies, there's nothing like permanent friendship, but there's a permanent interest. So Savimbi got it wrong, thinking that there's a permanent friendship with the United States of America. No. It was the interest. So if the interest shifts, the interest shifted due to what we call neoclassical counter-revolution. Let me just explain it. In the 1970s, there were a lot of coup d'etats. 70s, 80s, and 90s, there were a lot of coup d'etats in Africa, one of the highest. And about half of them were almost successful, almost always successful. Half of those coups were successful, meaning that they wanted to go to the Eastern Bloc, that's USSR, that's Russia, USSR, Union of Socialist Soviet Republic. They wanted to go there and they wanted to be socialist. And they were in the 70s and the early 80s. Then into the 90s, neoclassical counter-revolution came up that you have to be liberalized. You have to pick up democracy, accept democracy, or else we have nothing to do with you. America was funding Savimbi, but because Angola has crude oil, which they need, they will have to go with the winning side. And that was what? Dos Santos' side. Meanwhile, Dos Santos was Eastern, but they can negotiate, and they did negotiate. You know, that is foreign policy. It's about interest. So when you become a realist as a nation, you think of realism. In dealing with another country, you have to think of what's your self-interest as a nation. Then you look for aggression. Is there any form of aggression? Then at the same time, you're going to be looking at what we call zero-sum effects, meaning that if you take from them, you gain and they lose. It's zero-sum. Okay, for instance, the independence of African states. the forebearers of Africa, the forefathers of African countries that fought for independence, they were realists. They took the country back, so they gained, and the Europeans lost. Europeans and Arabs lost. Is that a bit better? Okay. So it's zero-sum effect. You gain, you lose. It's zero-sum effect. So they were realists at the time. At the same time, they were constructivists. They say you are not African. You are not just African, and so you don't belong here. And so you get out of it and go where you are coming from. Europe. Go to Europe, and that's it. That was constructivism. And you are either with us or you're against us. All right. That is just the foreign policy aspect of it. Some other writers think Africa doesn't have a foreign policy. It's not true. Africa does have a foreign policy. Dr. Nkrumah did, I'm not digressing, don't think I'm digressing. Dr. Nkrumah did, with others, form the non-aligned movement. Non-aligned means they are not going west or east. And that itself is a group. And so that's also an ideology. So that is a foreign policy. And they deal with you based on what? The interest that comes to their countries. Okay, that aside. So if African Union had a standing army, they would have sorted out Angola War probably far earlier. And the carnage, human loss, would not have been that high. And we are so sorry that we lost a lot of people in the Biafra War too. The human carnage was too much. It was just too much. Shouldn't have happened if African Union had a standing army, which Dr. Nkrumah proposed but wasn't accepted. Way back in 63, 64, 1963, 1964, it wasn't accepted. Okay, that he wanted a standing army for Africa, African military command, high command, but it didn't work. Okay, that's just one aspect of it. The other weakness is, you know, not all African countries have been not all African countries have been liberated from colonialism. Most of them, but there are two now. One is Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic. Some people call it Western Sahara, the country. Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic is being colonized by Morocco. Morocco is an African country and is colonizing another African country, which is quite strange. And it's been going on for some time that Organization of African Union has been playing the gentle game, and they have not found out that they needed to go back to the drawing board and flex their muscle as they did against apartheid. They haven't gotten up. The current Organization of African Union leadership that has transformed to African Union haven't realized themselves that, look, they needed to be constructivists, and that it's not possible that an African country should colonize another African country. Morocco cannot colonize the Sahrawi people. Apparently, Morocco and some oil companies are drilling their crude oil and gas and giving nothing to the people. Phosphate, they are mining phosphorus in that country. Sahrawi country, the Western Sahara, they are mining phosphate or phosphorus out of the place seriously, and nothing is for the people. The people are just wallowing in poverty, and that's not right. Organization of African Union and AU as of now have been quiet or not very active, such that the previous government of the United States of America, led by Donald Trump, has given Morocco a thumbs up for colonizing the region, which is not right. Organization of African Union, OAU and AU, have said it is not right, and they've lobbied European Union not to accept that deal, but Germans want to accept it. So what should you do? All you needed to do, AU. I'm talking of OAU and AU. The reason why I'm talking of AU is because the OAU ended in 2002, and it transferred all its power and transformed into AU, African Union. OAU, believing that they have sorted out all the political liberation out of the continent, transformed into African Union in 2002, July thereabout, to call themselves AU, and they transferred all their powers as well to that. Okay, mind you, OAU is not a registered entity. No, am I right? No, I'm not right. OAU is a registered entity, like a registered company, and so is AU registered. Okay, unlike United Nations that has no registration, Organization of African Union has a registration in a country. Okay, so then in Ethiopia, okay, so that is one aspect of it. It's now for African Union, AU, AU leadership should sit up and say, let's place an embargo on Morocco. Let's get Morocco out of AU, which they'll be happy. But you get them out. You place an embargo, no trade with Morocco, one. Then, of course, you make sure that none of their trade, no trade with Morocco, one. Two, travel ban. No flight, no land, no sea, nothing with Morocco. Algeria supports the Polisario Front. The Polisario Front are the military wing of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic. They are the military wing. Okay, so then you have to suspend Morocco. Algeria has come out so clear. They support the independence of the Sahrawi people. And so African Union also supports it, but they are not taking neither action. They need to place an embargo. And that embargo would kick Morocco such that they would have to give up that country because they are mining and stealing almost all their resources at the expense of the people, which is not right. Let's not hide it. Okay, so if OAU had a standing army, that would have been sorted out. So that's another weakness of OAU, and that's how come they just pull down. The other weakness is that you do not interfere in internal affairs of nations, especially when it comes to human rights abuse, like what was happening in Uganda under Idi Amin in 1972. Idi Amin had several cases of human rights abuse, and then OAU could have gone to find out and then advise him and stop him. But they couldn't get involved in internal affairs of various nations, and so then it became a weakness to them. But thankfully now we have the African Human Rights and People's Court at Arusha, Tanzania, formed in 1998 thereabout, and so you could go there if you have cases of human rights abuse. All right. You know, these are issues that you need to capture properly. All right. So that weakness is always there with Organization of African Unity. And so they had to transfer, not just because of the weakness, but because the primary aims of OAU had almost been achieved. They had to transfer to AU in 2002. By the way, let's not forget the Chacos archipelago belongs to the Mauritius people, but United Kingdom, India, and USA have captured that place. The Chacos, they've captured it, and they've just made it messy. And so AU would have to now take up these two cases and make sure that they take a stand, a critical stand, not just going to International Court of Justice, ICJ, in the UN for resolution. They have gone there for resolution. So that land should go, those islands should go to Mauritius, but UK is not permitting. UK has declared some section that they cannot go there because they have removed all the inhabitants there, and so they are using that as a military base for the United States and then UK. It's not right. Not in this day and age. UN itself knows it's not right, and UN Security Council has a bill on that, has a resolution rather on that. UN itself, UN General Assembly also has a resolution on that. But UK doesn't mind because UK is a superpower and they think they are realists and they think that they are so powerful, and as long as United Kingdom is concerned, they have the veto at UN Security Council, and then they can just rubbish anyone simply because they have that power, military power, technological power, and financial power. So they can rubbish anyone and any state in the world, as far as that state is not that powerful as they are. And that is wrong. That's not a way that it breeds anarchy. The United Kingdom would have to sit up and release the Chacos archipelago to Mauritius. Okay, so that's one aspect. If not, AU should take this up and place an embargo on United Kingdom. AU, African Union, should place an embargo. They should think of an effective embargo because United Kingdom is out of European Union now. So when you place an embargo on UK, trust me, trade embargo on United Kingdom today, if African Union places an embargo, trade embargo on United Kingdom today, 19th of July 2024, it will shake the whole United Kingdom up and they would release that land. It may take few weeks and they will release that Chacos Island. All those islands, they'll release it to Mauritius and there will be peace. You know, African Union leaders must take this thing serious. Deal with Morocco in relationship with the Sahrawi people, their independence. There must be self-determinism for the people. Then deal with United Kingdom on the other side. At the same time, simultaneously deal with United Kingdom so that another set of embargoes from Africa, because now we have a trade block after We'll get to that point. So those are issues that African Union has to take. You don't necessarily need to be militarized, but embargo. Such restrictions can also be effective, though it takes time to kick in. When it kicks in, it can bite and bite and bite, really bite well, badly, that it can cripple your economy. And United Kingdom depends on Africa big time, big time. So if Africa says no, no mining, no exploration for United Kingdom in Africa, on the African continent, you can just imagine all the UK soldiers would get up and want to come, but they know they cannot. It's not right, because they can't just come to Africa to war with us. They cannot. So African Union leaders, get up and do what is right. Save the Chacos, save Mauritius, then kick Morocco's colonial mentality out of the Sahrawi, Western Sahara. Okay. So then we get continuous. So it's just moved on. So these are foreign policies when United Nations has decolonized all nations. So what is Morocco doing in Sahrawi? What is UK doing in the Chacos? Should never happen. All right, let's take a break and back. All right, welcome to this segment again. It's about African foreign policy of African Union or African Unity, Organization of African Unity. Africa has foreign policy, but we seem not to be appreciating it. Even if it's amorphous, it's still a foreign policy. If it is non-aligned, it's still a foreign policy, and we have to appreciate what it is, because it shows clearly in the voting patterns at UN. All right. Say Liberia will vote in favor of America anytime, any day, simply because they were slaves that were kept there, taken from Africa, from various countries in Africa, and just dropped and dumped there. So they have Americanized themselves. But it's a matter of time. When they Africanize themselves again, they will toe the African Union line. Okay, so African Union is now the union in Africa, the biggest union in Africa, the continental unity in Africa. However, it is not a one country. The continent Africa is not a one country. It's made up of 54 independent sovereign states, sovereign nations. Independent sovereign nations. Okay, so that notwithstanding, the Organization of African Union and the Nkrumah decided that we should have a common market. That was Nkrumah's proposal in 1963, that we should have a common market. And thankfully, 2018, talks have been going on prior to that time anyway. Talks before then, 2018, has been going on until crystallized on 2018 in Rwanda, Kigali, where they decided that, look, let's form the African Continental Free Trade Zone. So an agreement was signed of 45 nations signed. Nigeria didn't sign early, but later they joined. And that's after African Continental Free Trade Agreement or Zone. So the head office is in Accra. What is it supposed to do? It is to harmonize all the tax issues of Africa. That's one. Two, it is to harmonize all the markets in Africa, such that instead of the intra-African trade of 15 to 18%, it should go as high as 50 to 75%. So Zimbabwe should trade with Ghana directly instead of trading with China. Angola should trade directly with Nigeria instead of what Angola going to trade with what Portugal. And then you ask, is it the ones are the same? Yes. If you do the math, you see that most of the items that African countries are importing from Europe, China, and America, you can still get in African countries. So standards must be worked out. And after it's working up standard, they have an organization that is rewriting the standard for the zone. That's the African Continental Free Trade Zone. Then the payment system has been simplified with the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, the PAPSIS. It's there, 2022 has been established. So within African countries, exchange rate doesn't matter. You can trade and send money and it will be accepted and it's converted into your nation's currency, and the recipient's nation currency. The sender's nation's currency can just be transferred and it will be accepted and converted straight without exchange rates going to the bureau and all those encumbrances or cumbersome ways of doing this, and it will be converted easily. And there's a unit for it under the PAPSI, Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. PAPSI. Okay, so that's also another achievement in 2022. So Africa is growing, and Africa, with this policy, it means that it has a foreign policy. Africa has a foreign policy that is what? Strengthening itself, doing inter-African trade, intra-African trade, inter-African countries trade, intra-African trade. That will boost the whole continent up, lift us up together, gain the hegemony that it deserves. Other than that, over $100 million is lost in Africa to tax evasion. Over 100 million is lost in tax evasion out of Africa annually. It's not good. Africa is always at the short end of agreements. But these are different nations that can trade within themselves. 54 nations with a population of 1.2 billion people. Africa can stand on its own when it goes for trade and lifts its trade up from the current 15 and 18% to 75%. It will match up to China. In terms of hegemony, Africa can match up to China. Africa can match up to Europe. Africa can match up to the United States of America. Then we have something that is ours. Then we know that Africa is strong. Africa has got that strength, that authority, that power, that realism always talk about. It's not, you could have a trade power and someone may have a military power, but if you know how to manipulate it, it's not easy to win. It is not going to be easy. And Africa has to always think of that we have a foreign policy, we have the resources, so we should have the power. The name is Kwame Afagbo. Thank you.